Hi, and welcome back to our next Fireside Chat. My name is Kevin Hill, Executive Publisher here at FreightWaves, and we're going to talk about sustainability with Andrew Stevens. He's the Executive Director of the Sustainable Shipping Initiative, or SSI, and it's all about bringing sustainability to the maritime and ocean carriers. How are you doing today, Andrew?
Great, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for inviting me to chat with you.
Great. Andrew, can you give our audience a little bit of background about the SSI or the Sustainable Shipping Initiative, and a little bit background about yourself?
Sure, great. Um, Start with myself, I guess. I'm the Executive Director of the Sustainable Shipping Initiative, or the SSI. I'll use SSI from now on, it's easier. And I've basically been in the maritime industry for close to 30 years. Most of those have been spent overseas, working in the industry part of the sector, chief operating officer positions in the Wilhelmsen Ship Service Group, based in Norway, and latterly in the Wallum Ship Management Group, based in Hong Kong. Chartered management accountant by profession, and in 2018 I joined the Sustainable Shipping Initiative, leading the Secretariat. The SSI started in 2010 and was born out of one of its founding members, Forum for the Future, sustainability NGO. The SSI became an independent entity, non-profit and registered charity in the UK in 2013. And it's a member-led NGO focused on the long-term sustainability in the shipping sector, and is made up of 15 like-minded and forward-leaning members across the value chain, which are banks, classification societies, charterers, ship owners, operators, shipyards, service providers, and NGOs such as WWF and Forum for the Future. And really the focus is shining the light on actions and milestones that are needed to bring about sustainability in the shipping sector over the long term, the coming decades, very often pointing at activities or actions that are required beyond regulation to secure that sustainable industry. And this is done through thought leadership, partnering, and collaboration, both within and across the sectors, really recognizing that no single entity or stakeholder group can solve this alone. We're guided by our roadmap, which the SSI developed in consultation with other industry stakeholders. We organize ourselves through work groups, and currently we're focused on decarbonisation, which is in two parts. One is defining the sustainability criteria for marine fuels, so the future fuels that's being considered. That is in partnership with CBS Maritime and the Green Shipping Project, and the availability of sustainable biofuels for shipping, either as a bridge or a transitional solution towards decarbonisation or the longer term. Human side, or the social side, we're focused on an initiative which we're calling Delivering on Seafarers' Rights, which is in partnership with the Institute of Human Rights for Business, IHRB. And we also host an independent initiative called the Ship Recycling Transparency Initiative, which is focused on safe and responsible ship recycling at the end of life for vessels.
Yeah. You mentioned thought leadership and SSI's thought leadership. You guys do a report every couple of years on sustainability trends. The latest report just was published a couple, 3 months ago. Can you give us some key highlights included in this year's report?
Yeah, so this is our roadmap update that we launched first in 2016, and we conducted an update through the end of 2019 and through 2020, and released that in December of 2020. And this is really shining the light on 6 vision areas that the industry needs to focus on for that long-term sustainability, and trying to balance that this is a focus in the industry on sustainability that's not just about decarbonisation, which is clearly a very large spotlit focus right now, and a very hot topic. But the roadmap emphasises the need for work across other vision areas: ocean governance, port and coastal communities, seafarers, transparency and accountability, sustainable finance, and of course the energy is one of the vision areas where decarbonisation dominates. The roadmap for us is not conclusive and it's not all encompassing, but we try to cover as much as possible the industry inputs and feedback and dialogue that we recognise shows and brings examples of progress and areas of concern. So we have been updating the milestones across the vision areas. We now have 60 milestones, and we encourage very much industry stakeholders to share an update with us, which we have a form for that on our website. Key findings, biggest challenges the maritime faces in its transition to sustainability that emerged is clearly, I already mentioned it, decarbonisation. All of shipping is rallying around this topic and its challenge, which is great because it requires every stakeholder across the value chain to contribute, which is not only in the private sector, but also collaborating and aligning, working together with the public sector. So regulation, policy, etc. And we're governed in shipping by the IMO, which is a UN agency. But it requires all nations in most cases to agree for regulation change to happen. So this is quite a massive challenge that the industry is facing, and that's clearly emerged through our findings. Go ahead.
But before we jump into the energy, which is what I think the common person thinks of when we think of sustainability and transportation, let's touch upon the other parts of the sustainability goals that the SSI has. One of those being sustainable finance. And can you speak to any trends or the trends in sustainable finance that you're seeing roll out?
Yeah, so it's one of the areas that we see progress happening quite quick. There's a coalescing around tools that the industry can use from the demand side, being the investors and the lenders. They're getting more engaged in asserting their own principles and policies around sustainability and releasing mechanisms and tools that can help engage the financial sector with the shipping operators, and we see a growing interest here for that to happen in a more of a partnership basis rather than a stick. So there's the carrot and the stick elements, but very much the carrot is coming in where there are mechanisms stimulating progress, the issuing of green bonds, sustainability linked bonds or loans. There's also blue bonds. And the use of these is becoming more and more prominent in shipping.
So when you talk about green bonds and blue bonds, what exactly are the conditions for being able to issue debt with a green bond or a blue bond?
Yeah, so it's very much like all things, I guess. What gets measured gets actioned or gets done. So there's setting of targets around some key sustainability indicators that are typically then agreed based on the business profile and the bank's profile or the investor's profile around that bond. So they'll be unique to the deal, where the use of the funds that are being generated through the bond or the loan is designated for those ecological or ESG related investments, and indicators which could be decarbonisation, typically the Poseidon Principles, which is a group of banks that have come together who incentivize loans in terms of rates and risk profiles based on performance of lowering carbon emissions through a portfolio perspective. So it's more geared on the incentive than the stick. And I think it's also about partnering, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, in terms of sharing how these things can be achieved. Because I think there are many small operators in shipping who, through hundreds of years of operations are doing things in the same way, but actually need some support and help on how to do things differently to accelerate the transition to a sustainable shipping operation.
Yeah, but the Poseidon Principle, I like that name.
Yeah,
It's very catchy. It's good.
yeah.
Let's talk about the smaller ocean carrier owners and those shipping companies and how the SSI is beneficial to how they do business now and how they should think about doing business in the future.
Yeah, so back to our thought leadership role. We're not an activist or lobbyist aimed at government policy, etc. So we're more leading by example, and those across the value chain are sharing through their actions. They're sharing learnings. They're engaging collaboratively, speaking across the industry and sharing their experience and findings of what works. In particular, their focus on, not doing good, not just not doing harm, etc. And within the SSI, we welcome members across the value chain, even at different stages of their sustainability journey, because this is very much a collaborative environment where that learning is being shared, and we're joining the dots across the value chain, which can help some in their sustainability journey accelerate that learning and accelerate the adoption of different policies or practices or planning for different actions, and perhaps embedding processes, changing culture, etc. within their organization.
Yeah, that's great topics there. Let's switch over to energy. What most people like to talk about with sustainability, energy and fuel. And let's start off talking a little bit about IMO 2020 and what you've seen so far with that rule and its effects. I know COVID has kind of changed what we all thought IMO 2020 might be for 2020. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we have not been so focused on the IMO 2020 regulation change or operation, but more focused on the longer term fuels that may be being considered for zero carbon shipping. But I think one reflection on the IMO 2020 is that if shipping is to achieve its decarbonisation and adoption of new technologies, efficiencies, propulsion, and fuels, regulation is a key part of that, as IMO 2020 on the sulfur cap, etc. is. But the IMO 2020 sulfur cap took 12 years, I think, from its first discussion to be implemented. And shipping is traditionally slow to change. And many of those small operators that you mentioned a few minutes ago, Kevin, are waiting for regulation before they change. So in terms of energy and transition, we need faster decision making and policy adoption, and on a global level through IMO, to really avoid regional regulation emerging, which was one of the issues around sulfur or SOx and NOx emissions.
Yeah. So Andrew, we did an interview with you not too long ago about SSI and your new report coming out. And you mentioned in that interview where you see in the future not one particular fuel winning out, but several, depending on region and kind of the natural resources of the area, technology in the area, different factors, right? Can you explain to our audience a little bit about that conversation, how we did that, and your philosophy or thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think the challenge is, shipping has been reliant on heavy fossil fuel, oil, diesel, etc. for decades. And that has been very much the sort of end of the production process of other fuels for other sectors, and has enjoyed the same infrastructure, the sort of common choice of one or two, perhaps now low sulfur fuels, etc., are part of the mix that have added to that. But going forwards, there's choices to be made around the technology and the equipment that goes on board ship will take up different sizes of what is today cargo capacity. And some future solutions will suit very much short sea, inland waterways, regional, local, coastal trade, which could be electric, batteries, etc. But for deep sea ocean going vessels, there needs to be a different solution, at least based on today's outlook around electricity or battery fuel cell technology. And it's not certain what the winning combination or single fuel will be. It seems that there's not going to be a replacement silver bullet for today's situation. So there could be an array of fuels, and that could be driven by decisions and assessments made by different segments within the industry, whether it's a container, liner trade, tanker trade, or then bulk tramping trade, which vessels can go in different directions, even turn around and go back in different directions. And that requires a different fuel supply infrastructure. So I think we'll probably narrow down to 1, 2, or 3. It may not be 1, which is why I mentioned there could be an array of fuels. But I think we'll see that different segments within the industry will be making those choices, which will probably be a combination of investor influence, charter influence, as well as the ship owner operator influence.
I think that's one of the most exciting things about living through these times. Non-carbon fuels, alternatives, whether it's ocean or land transportation, there's no clear-cut winner, and there probably won't be a clear-cut winner for maybe a long, long time. There's going to be these intermediate stages where a number of different fuels are used depending on the situation or what makes economic sense. Mm-hmm. Definitely. So we talked a little bit about energy, a little bit about finance. What are some of the other really main points or main segments for the SSI?
Yeah, so we're focused on, as I mentioned, the Ship Recycling Transparency Initiative, but also the human side, which is delivering on seafarers' rights. And really core to those two initiatives is transparency and accountability. Ship recycling is an end-of-life industry. It's one of the most hazardous parts of the shipping sector, but it's hardly known to very many. And the practices that have been exposed by others, more of the activist, lobbyist, NGO type, sharing their perspectives, their findings, their learnings, which is very important to expose on the unsafe practices within the industry and associated with different types and ways of doing this, which includes a lot of manual labor rather than automation, etc., and bits of ships being released into the tidal zone, etc. And the Ship Recycling Transparency Initiative is a coalescing of the demand side back to the investors, the lenders, the charterers, and the carriers, the ship owners, shining the light and demanding and putting pressure on that supply side to bring about the safe and responsible ship recycling practices, but through transparency by the ship owners and allowing themselves to be held to account for their policies, their practices, and how they manage those processes to secure that safe and responsible ship recycling. Similarly, on the human side, the delivering on seafarers' rights, this is also a kind of hidden industry in many ways in terms of how a seafarer is engaged in shipping on typical contracts of 4 to 6 months, taking some time off, but then joining perhaps a different ship, perhaps a different ship owner, through a different agent, through a different ship manager, etc., on different conditions and different ways of being looked at as a responsible worker, a key worker in the industry. COVID has shone a light currently on the stranded seafarer situation, whereas our work is looking on that transparency and accountability, not just for now, but on the longer term. So the systemic issues around securing seafarers' rights and that they have a right for being heard, they have a right for remedy etc., in terms of fair treatment and responsible employment.
Certainly, these are all best practices for the maritime industry and going forward, and making sure that everything is, to lack of a better word, sustainability is built into the system. For our audience, how do they reach out, contact you, and where's your website? How do people go learn more about the SSI and all the great things that you guys are doing?
Yeah, so our website, sustainableshipping.org. You can reach us there. There's a contact form there. And we, as I mentioned earlier on our roadmap, we have a form per each of the vision areas where we encourage the sharing of progress across the different operations, different organizations. Please share what you are learning, what can help us share with others. And we are doing similar on our work on defining sustainability criteria, where we're about to launch our white paper, and we will encourage engagement over a period where we can have contributions from the industry to help shape what is sustainable criteria for those fuels.
What's the timing for your white paper?
We'll be launching that next week.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So I encourage everybody to go out to learn more about SSI. Go to your website. The white paper will be out by the time this is aired at the conference. So yeah. I encourage you to go do that. Thank you so much for your time today, Andrew.
Great.
Take care and stay tuned for our next fireside chat.
Great. Lovely. Thanks, Kevin. Stay safe, everyone.